Welcome back to Life Group, everybody. This has been a great week. We started this brand new series called Isolated, where we've been talking about the reality of what seasons in the wilderness, seasons in the desert are like for you and I. I'm encouraged by the passage from Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. It says, "We don't have a high priest," speaking of Jesus, "who's unable to empathize with our weakness. But instead, we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin." See, Jesus understands what it's like to be fully human, all the while being fully God. And that makes it possible for me to relate to Jesus because of his humanity. But I can also trust him because of his divinity, because he is God. Now, this helps me to sort of get a grip on my faith, understanding who Jesus really is. Jesus had to do that. 40 days before he started his ministry here on earth, he spent it kind of in the wilderness. He was fasting, he was praying, and he had to kind of go head to head, toe to toe with the devil. And what it gave him the ability to do is get in touch with his weak spots. See, Jesus knew his dangerous places. He knew because the devil was tempting him in those areas, tempting him to be kind of act out and do things on his own. If Jesus knew what his dangerous places are, what are yours and mine? And once we identify what those are, the goal is to invite Jesus in and to be a part of that. But there are also some practical steps that you and I can take. Our health is number one, like sleeping regular, eating regularly, being on point when it comes to how we work out. Stress is reduced and when we do these things. But when we don't do these things, then our stress is increased. And stress leads to temptation. Also understanding that here, I'm not the only one being tempted this way. My temptation is common to everyone, that I'm not alone. And then I have to ask God to kind of reveal to me the escape routes in my life, the areas that'll keep me from falling into these dangerous traps. Once I do that, it gives me the ability to sort of get my confidence back, to really walk in the grace and mercy that has been God's gift to me. So now that you're all caught up on the message for this weekend, I want you to take a few moments and talk about this question. What are the areas in your life that you need more grace and more mercy?
As we start in this new series, Isolated, we'll be discussing how God has used different, let's say, desert wanderings to refine and develop his people. We see many of these experiences throughout the Bible, and not only with Moses when he fled Egypt after killing an Egyptian soldier, or later in his life when he led the Israelites out of Egypt, but in other characters in the Bible. John the Baptist, for example, who paved the way for the Messiah, or the Apostle Paul, whom Jesus confronted on the road as he continued to seek the death sentence for Christ's followers. And then lastly, of course, Christ himself was tempted in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. And these are just a few of the examples of how God uses desert experiences to prepare and test the character of his own. So today, we're going to be looking at the story of Moses, and specifically, we're going to look at how Israel was stranded in the wilderness for 40 years, and the fact that Moses did not get to enter the promised land. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a snapshot look at the nation of Israel. The Bible documents the account of God's miracles and his judgments and his promises and then blessings for the history of Israel. Israel began really as a promise to Abraham, and for more than 400 years, Abraham and those who followed after him, they relied on that promise, even through their period of slavery in Egypt. At that point, God delivered Israel out of Egypt by an amazing series of miraculous events. The Exodus, as it's called in Scripture, is that moment that most Jews look at it as one of the most defining moments of the nation of Israel. The Exodus is the act of deliverance in which Israelites rightly see the demonstration of God's love and his protection over the people of Israel. And once the Exodus is completed, God established a covenant with the Israelites at Mount Sinai. It's there that God proclaimed his law, the Ten Commandments. And it's there that God promised the blessings for adherence to the law and consequences for being disobedient. And the rest of Israel's history, as it's recorded in the Bible, is kind of a cycle of blessing and punishment. Throughout the times of victory and defeat, kings and judges, priests and prophets, restoration and exile, the Israelites were blessed when they obeyed God and disciplined when they did not. So let's take a closer look at Moses' legacy and better understand why he was really never able to enter the promised land. I believe that this serves as an example of how we handle our desert experiences in life in a way that better serves God and his purposes for us. Now, before we look at the story of Moses and Aaron and the land of Israel, let's look at the following question. So you guys, do you complain or become angered at God when going through moments of hardship and trial? And how are you at being obedient to the people of leadership that God has placed in your life, whether mentors or life group members or pastors? Go ahead and discuss that question. Now let's take a moment to look at Numbers chapter 20, verses 2 through 5. It says, "Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, 'If only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into this wilderness, that we and our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink.'" So here in Numbers chapter 20, verses 2 through 5, the people of Israel, their rebellion are really the byproduct of a lack of faith in God's promise and provision for them. I mean, it's interesting to see how fast Israel was to forget what God had done for them and how they ignored or maybe were unable to see his hand at work. It seemed easy for them to really forget about the many years and number of generations that were bound in slavery. It seemed easy for the people to lose sight of God because they did not remember and really appreciate what he'd done. God had meant for this to be a time of preparation and reflection, a kind of training ground for his people. But instead, they grumbled and even mentioned that death was a plausible alternative. Now, it's easy to see that they lost sight of what God was trying to show them. They had lost focus and faith and hope, and so they lashed out at God and his messenger, Moses. So before we continue, let's take a moment to look at the following question. If you're in a training ground moment right now, do you trust God enough to bring you out of the wilderness in his timing? Is something in your life holding you back, or have you forgotten what God has done and wants to do in your life? So let's pick back up in the story and turn to Numbers chapter 20, verses 6 through 13. It says, Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting and fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so that they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence just as he commanded him, and then he and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock. And Moses said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? And then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff, and water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land that I give them. These were the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord and where he was proved holy among them. Now, when our attitudes and our motives are in right alignment with God, we desire to submit to his plan, his provision, and his authority. Moses was told to speak to the rock, but instead he called the people rebels in verse 10 and said, shall we bring forth the water, implying that it was the work of Moses and Aaron to provide for the people. It was not. Rather, it was the Lord who would provide the life-giving water. Then lastly, Moses did this in front of the Israelites. Such a public example of disobedience could not go without consequences. And God sees us as he did Israel, despite their flaws, and continued to provide what was needed to follow him, not necessarily what they wanted. Even though Israel constantly fell, God always offered a way back to him. So after looking through this scripture, let's take a moment and answer the following question. Have you ever felt stuck and frustrated like Moses did? Why has God stopped you from exiting the wilderness, or why is he stopping you now? So, if one of the great writers were writing the story of your life, would the author write that you quarreled with God or submitted to Him? Go ahead and discuss this with your group. As we end our time together, take some time to pray through the answers to the questions that you've shared with your group. Also, if you want to dig deeper into the scripture, I want to encourage you to study the other wilderness experiences that I mentioned at the opening of our time together. That'll really help you to grow at the soul level. And please know that I am totally praying for you guys. So have a blessed week.